Hello everybody and welcome to another video. Today it is the 21st of October and I hope the mic quality is conducive. Just bear with me for today and tomorrow, but I will be getting the quality fixed by the 23rd. And so for now, we're just going to go over really what occurred on the 18th and the 19th and also the 20th of October, in addition to the 21st of October, which I'll also be talking about. And so this is going to be a very long video. And so, of course, we're going to spend most of the video talking about whatever occurred in Kherson. And so here I'm going to start off by working my way from the south to the north, and I'll also be talking about what happened in a chronological order from like the 18th to the 21st. And so first of all, the 59th and the 28th Mechanized Brigades are really coordinating with one another in the Posad Pokrovsk direction. And so over here, that's really where you have a lot of these Ukrainian hubs of supplies and of military operations. And so from there, they're getting shipments of new ammo and equipment deliveries. And really, their entire plan in this area is to sort of keep the Russians tied down as they prepare for whatever strike force they're building up in the north. And so that's why you're hearing about these clashes at around like Pravdinye or like Soldatske. You're shelling by Ukraine of like Ternovy Poli or of Zeleny High. So that's really their goal over here, is to tie up Russian forces so they can't be sent northwards. Additionally, you have news of renewed reconnaissance operations, this time using drones. They might be Puma drones, but I'm not sure. And so a lot of those are being used right now by Ukraine in the Oleksandrivka sector, right around here. You also have the 63rd Brigade of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, which I'll try to find on the map right now because I have that unit marked somewhere over here. It's just hard to find. All right, it's over here. It was reported today that they were shelling the Russian positions around Snihorivka and on several other settlements in this direction. And so that was pretty notable because of the scale of the shelling. And so Kiselivka, that's really where this is coming from. Kiselivka, it's a good like forward position to station like artillery to rain down, especially on this highway which goes from Snihorivka all the way to like the Darivka River and I think into Kherson or into Kherson. So from Snihorivka to Kherson. And so in Snihorivka, you actually have the 34th Independent Motor Rifle Brigade. Really, the point of this unit is just to like guard the flanks because as you have all the fighting that's going on in the northern part of Kherson, there is always that threat that the Ukrainians will get some contingent of forces to attack a bit further to the west and a bit further to the south, and then it would sort of like envelop the Russian forces. But for that to happen, first of all, they would need to overrun the Russian lines around Blagodatne and Maximivka, and then actually cross the Darivka River over here. And so that's why you have this unit in the first place stationed over here. So now let's go to the sector where there actually was the most fighting. And so that was a bit further to the north. So over here, really the fighting started around the 19th of October. You had a pretty sizable assault, but it was more so of a recon operation. And so there were about 20 groups of DRG units that were sent in certain waves on the 19th of October into like several towns, most notably in the area around Duduchani and in the direction of Novokamyanka, coming from there towards like Piati Khati and Sukhanove or Borozhenske, and also from Davidiv Bri to Bruskinske or from Suki Stavak towards like Kostromka. Those were really the main areas where you had Ukrainian infiltrations, and so it wasn't necessarily a renewal of the offensive. More so, it was a probing attack, which has happened before. And so the entire point of this is to like gauge how strong the Russian defensive lines are, to find some sort of weak point that could like be exploited later on. And so that's really what they were doing there. And so let's get into some of the specifics. it was reported that the 17th Tank Brigade was really one of the main units involved in this, so I'm going to try to find them on the map right now. Okay, so here you have the 17th Tank Brigade, and they really worked in tandem specifically with the 128th Mountain Assault Brigade to conduct these recon attacks on the 19th. And so they didn't send in their entire brigade, obviously. They sent in like a few companies, let's say. And so basically the general strategy is to just advance through these open fields. You see there's just like lines over here with bushes and trees and different hedgerows. And so that's really where the mechanized columns were pushing through. And of course, before those mechanized columns pushed through, you had like small groups of Ukrainian soldiers trying to like parse through the no man's land and through the different trees to like find some cover so they could enter into the Russian lines. And so that was really what was happening, and it was sort of a game of cat and mouse as the Russian artillery rained on the Ukrainian infiltrators into the Russian lines. And so eventually you had mechanized columns coming in. So there were some heavy clashes, and you especially had a lot of Russian aviation and Russian drones, Russian artillery striking the mechanized columns, the tanks, or the infantry fighting vehicles of the Ukrainians, because they were totally exposed. Because look, this entire area is just open. There's basically no cover, and so they need a lot of like support, like air defense, in order to even conduct this sort of operation without suffering heavy damage to their equipment. And so undoubtedly there was a lot of destruction to the Ukrainian equipment. So I actually have some footage of that here. I think here's actually one of the destroyed Russian equipment, because yeah, there were some of the saboteurs that were able to get into the Russian lines and attack them while they were unprepared. And so we actually do have some footage of that. We also have footage of the paratroopers that were defending the Russian lines, and they captured equipment from the 28th Brigade. So yeah, you also have the 28th Brigade, specifically the 1st Mechanized Battalion. They were also involved in this recon operation. And so they were actually fighting a bit further to the south, but I guess some of their units were moved around. That is certainly possible. And so also I have here the 76th Division of the Russian Army. They took over an armored personnel carrier and destroyed a T-72. So I have those two videos linked over here. And also here we have a POW video. There's also another one, two of them actually from here, of some Ukrainian POWs that were captured. And so the numbers aren't that large based off of the footage, but there were a few people that during the saboteur operations got captured as they were going in and entering these towns. And of course, these are not exact geolocations. I'm just putting them roughly around where I'd assume they're located. So of course, it could be from some different sector, but that's what it was labeled in the tweets. Now let's actually look at the Russian units and what they did during these clashes. And so you had, first of all, the 11th Guards Air Assault Brigade. And so some of the Russian sources were claiming at the time that they were fighting around Novokamyanka. And so there is actually a good chance that this area is a gray zone. And that's why there's actually a good chance that this entire area is being fought over and that the situation is fluid over here. I did have one geolocation that was pretty close to Novokamyanka of Ukrainians destroying a BM-27. And so certainly they're in this area, but there is a case to be made that the town is still contested. Either way, there was clashes in this direction at least. And so that could be around this path over here. And so what was reported by the Russian sources, and obviously take it with a grain of salt, is that the 11th Guards Air Assault Brigade, they were actually surrounded in this area, and that they were able to break through and destroy 20 Ukrainian tanks. We did see evidence of destroyed Ukrainian tanks, but I'm not sure if 20 of them were found in the footage. You do have a lot of footage released, especially by the paratrooper units, of drone strikes and artillery strikes and such. We actually have one that was geolocated to over here, I think, of a Lancet drone. It destroyed an air surveillance radar. So a lot of these like smaller drones, like the Lancet drones or like the Orlan 10 drones, but I'm pretty sure the Orlan 10 is a recon drone. Some quadcopters, for instance, these sort of drones, they're being used by the Russian army, and they do inflict some sort of damage on the open targets. Now let's move on to some other units. Here is the, I want to look at the 83rd Brigade. I want to try to find that. The 83rd Guards Air Assault Brigade, they're really spread out across this entire line. So there's not one set location to put them. I just put them here because they did have at least some presence in this town. And so really their job was just to hold the line, and they took at least one POW. And so they were basically the unit that took that one POW in the video that I linked. But anyway, let's move on to the next unit, which was the 98th Brigade, which is over here, I think. This is the 90th Guards Airborne Division. They were very close to the coastal area, basically defending the southern part of Duchani, where you have the 128th Mountain Assault Brigade and the 28th Brigade, and they were constantly sending in forces to here attacking. So their job was just to hold on. It seems like they were successful because there was no sort of breakthrough, but there was some sort of casualties inflicted on both sides. This is actually the unit that lost the BTR 80, and so they had some of their units sort of rotated out, and the 98th Brigade, some of their brigades were, some of their battalions were replaced by the 11th Guards Air Assault Brigade, which you talked about previously. Really, the smallest brigade-sized unit in this area is the 80th Arctic Brigade, which is over here. Was beforehand, it was on the Finnish border, and so now it was moved into the area in Sukhanove, fighting in the Novokamyanka direction. And so they're a pretty small unit. There's not much information as to what they were doing. Seems like they were sent in as sort of like a reinforcement to hold the line. And again, they have been able to hold this line tentatively for about a few weeks now. We're going to see if that changes as Ukraine continues to accumulate forces, because they do have a lot of reinforcements being moved in from some key supply hubs. Brezhnev is just one of them. That's the hub that sort of moves troops across the Inhulets River to like Davydiv Brid or Suky Stavak. But there are many other towns that are involved in this. There are some key rail hubs. For instance, there's Apostolove, which is really connected to Kryvyi Rih. And so from Apostolove, you have a lot of troops that are sent in, moved in to the northern Kherson front. And then also you have a lot of troops that are being moved in from, say, Odessa or Mykolaiv, or from just like Western Ukraine in general. I know in Zakarpattia Oblast, which is over here, a lot of the 128th Mountain Assault Brigade men come from here. And so like you have all these rail lines that are supplying those forces. And so a lot of those units and equipment is coming in through Kazanka over here, this town over here, key rail hub. It's also coming in from Znamyanka, which is a bit further to the north. You can see that Znamyanka is about over here. And so really this not only supplies the Kherson front, but it really does connect from Western Ukraine to the cities on the Dnieper River like Kremenchuk or Kamyanske, Cherkasy, and then from there they get moved into any other part of the front line, especially like Zaporizhia or the Luhansk front right now. So that is all important to look at in terms of Ukrainian supply lines. A Russian journalist, Alexander Kotz, he actually says that Ukraine has a 4-to-1 manpower advantage in the Kherson sector. And so this is very telling of the situation in this area, where really Ukraine does have the manpower advantage, and they also do have the initiative in terms of their offensive actions right now. And so the question is, how likely is it that they will succeed in whatever upcoming plans they have, if they have any, because even that's being put into question now. So according to some Ukrainian higher-ups, the Russians actually have 3 defensive lines that still have to be broken through. So I would assume the first line is actually just the front line over here. And then I'm very curious to know what will be the second line. If I had to guess what the second line would be, it would be probably from about, say, Stanislav and still holding on to Kiselivka, withdrawing from Snihurivka, but still maintaining some like forward positions pretty close to it, and then actually just holding on to all of the minor towns that are adjacent to Novokyri. So maybe something like this. Maybe there are fortifications around here. I know for sure that there are fortifications around Alexandrivka in this area, and that there are many lines of defense being constructed around Kiselivka, because this is really the one town that's in between Kiselivka and Kherson. There's also Chernobyivka, if I'm not mistaken. And so the last line would probably be just centered around Kherson itself. Maybe it also includes, say, Nova Kakhovka and Berislav. And then, of course, you have like your own minor, like intricate defenses in each of these cities. The thing about all of these cities now is that they're going to be evacuated of civilians. And so if Ukraine actually reaches this area, the Russians are just going to station themselves in the high-rise buildings, and it will make any sort of advances very, very difficult. And certainly it is possible that Ukraine could win that urban battle, but the cost will be tremendous. It could turn out to be another Mariupol if that ends up happening. But the other theory of what will happen is that there will be some sort of destruction of the Nova Kakhovka Dam, which is over here. And I want to really like go in depth and talk about what's going on here. And I want to give really the claims from both sides, and then you can make your own decision as to what you believe is going to happen over here. Really, this entire drama started with Surovikin, who is the leader of the special military operation right now. He said that he has data that the armed forces of Ukraine will actually hit the dam with missiles, so that sort of implies that they will use some sort of MLRS system. And then 2 days later, Zelensky stated that Russia had actually mined the plant, and so they were just like preparing to blow it up at some point whenever the time was right. Meanwhile, the Russians, they actually allege that Ukraine is releasing sea mines, and that they're being sent in from specifically this town over here. I want to find its location, Hyrylivka, just to the north of Duchany. And because the river flows south, obviously it would reach towards the dam, and then it could potentially cause some damage. Meanwhile, a key advisor to Zelensky actually tweeted on Twitter that Surovikin will actually mine the transformers in the plant. I'm going to try to find those. The transformers are probably like over here in this area. And then also the dam itself, in order to prevent some sort of counteroffensive. So I really want to look into these claims right now. And so first, let's look at what Ukraine is alleging, and we'll look at sort of likelihood of their claims. If Russia were to do this and blow up the dam or mine it somehow and cause flooding, this would be a major disaster for their forces that are still in Kherson, which is why this occurring now is very unlikely, especially if Russia were to be the one to do it, because the flooding will make it incredibly difficult for them to retreat. It will make it incredibly difficult for them to sort of continue supplying the left bank of the Dnieper River, left bank which is now going to be isolated, and so they can be pushed through and just isolated, and the entire pocket will be quelled. And so it would be a horrible decision to blow it up right now. So probably what the Ukrainian side is alleging is that if the Russians see that they are losing and that they are starting to have to withdraw from the left bank of the river, then they would actually blow it up, because at that point they would have nothing to lose, and it would slow down the Ukrainian offensive, and in the process it would cause a lot of damage. So I actually want to read this stat from a article, I think it was from 2004, from this Ukrainian newspaper, Hrivnia. I'll actually link the article in the description. It's in Ukrainian, but I just use Google Translate. Basically, what they said is that in the case of the flooding of the Nova Kakhovka Dam, the floods would be 4.8 meters in height. That would be the height of the waves. and the flood itself would start 2 hours after the explosions in the Novakhovka Dam. The flood width would be 5 kilometers. The rising waters would really occur for about 14 hours before it would stop, and the velocity would be 24.4 kilometers an hour for 3 days. And it would be going at 7 meters a second. So really, as the flood is just like inundating everything surrounding it, it would really be hitting like a wall, and so it could like cause enormous destruction to like any sort of thing that is in its path, any sort of buildings or structures, and so that would have enormous implications on the civilian areas. And so there are about 80 settlements, I would say, that would be affected by this, specifically on the right bank of the river, which is over here. You see this like green region that is like looks like a floodplain. That's the region that would be the most affected by this, because these areas are incredibly low in elevation, and so they would be the first ones to suffer. So in this area, you do have several settlements, not necessarily Kherson itself, but a lot of the town is next to it. Kherson itself would also be affected by this, and so that would cause a lot of damage to whatever troops were stationed in that area. It also caused damage to whatever troops are stationed on the right bank of the river. And so if Russia were to do this, they would be sort of like giving up control of this area. They would have to withdraw beforehand and then wait for it to dry up again. But like if they were to do this without any sort of like necessary planning, and they would do it haphazardly, and that could lead to a major disaster for their military force as well, because they could have troops stationed in this area, they could have equipment stationed in this area that would all have to be withdrawn before blowing up the dam. Now let's look at really the Russian perspective of this. And so they were the first ones to allege that Ukraine would do this. And really the rationale would be that the Russians are holding the line right now. It doesn't seem like they're going to collapse. They have 3 lines of defense, and as a result, really the best thing Ukraine can do is blow up the dam in order to disconnect the supply lines between the right and the left bank. And so they can just do that by blowing up the flood. It would probably destroy the Antonovsky Bridge, destroy any sort of bridges around Novakhovka. And so the Ukrainians, they would have a window of opportunity to launch an assault as the Russians were caught off guard, and potentially they could push the Russians back and cause them to surrender, make them lose around the key cities, and then the new line of fighting would be around the Dnieper River. Of course, this would mean that any sort of new offensives to on the right bank of the river would be very difficult, because there would be no more crossings that they can use to actually attack this area. They would probably have to use like speedboats to get across and then launch attacks from there, but this would be very difficult. And so Russia is saying that they're doing it. The proof is that they've already done this before, so why wouldn't they do it again? So let's actually look at the satellite imagery. I have the marker linked over here if you're interested to see some actually very up close satellite imagery of the shelling that occurred on this dam in previous times. So mainly the road is targeted over here, because that's where you have like the military equipment that's transferred in by Russia. That's the main part that is attacked by the HIMARS, not necessarily the lock on the dam, which is located over here. Of course, there's been a lot of footage seen of damage within the hydroelectric plant itself, and so a lot of the shells might be falling along this road as well and hitting it as well. But in terms of the dam itself, none of the rounds have actually hit the dam itself, causing the flooding just yet. So it seems as if Ukraine, if they're using these high precision missiles, they can do that in the future, which is why Russia will probably be beefing up their air defense systems in this area. You also have a lot of haphazardly, or I would say like makeshift bridges that were set up around here that are not shown on Google Maps because they were set up pretty recently. But you have like 3 of them over here, and they're basically used to transfer the heavy equipment. And so you also have in the satellite imagery a lot of holes in those bridges because those are being used by the Russian military. But anyway, the Ukrainians did strike the Antonovsky Bridge recently. I'm pretty sure it was a day or two ago. According to the local pro-Russia sources in the Kherson region, there was a HIMARS strike on the bridge and potentially on the ferries and the pontoon crossing, which was constructed because the Russians actually finished building their pontoon crossing, which goes across the river over here. And so what they're saying is that there were 6 arrivals and that there were 7 people killed in the attack and then 9 wounded. Also, there were apparently 15,000 people that were evacuated from the right bank towards the left bank. And so you might see many more being evacuated in the future. But the question is, how many people even live here right now? I'm not exactly sure how many people live within the left bank, the right bank, which is under Russian control right now. The numbers might be a bit lower because of the war and everything, but it seems as if the process is already beginning and that there are new areas of housing or new units of housing for these people being set up in, say, Crimea or on the left bank, of Kherson. And so that's it for Kherson. Let's move on to the Zaporizhia front right now. In recent days, there were reports of massive artillery duels in this area and that Russia was just launching these constant artillery barrages. Specifically, they were hitting agricultural enterprises around the town of Novodanilivka. That's around over here. It's a town pretty close to the front lines. You probably have a lot of recon units and squads that are like pushing in from Novodanilivka, and so that's probably why the Russians are showing this area. They want to prevent any sort of Ukrainian offensive operations. Interestingly, though, we've seen a lot of forces accumulating along the Ukrainian line in Zaporizhia. So I'm talking about towns like Huliapilske, Huliapoli, Malinivka, and also Orikhiv. Orikhiv is probably the most important city on the Ukrainian defensive line in Zaporizhia. Specifically, the 65th Mechanized Brigade has been sent to Orikhiv, so they will be fighting over here. They're actually a very new unit. It was formed in May of 2022, so they really don't have that much combat experience. This might be their first actual engagement, and so you're seeing a lot of reinforcements being moved into here, some rotation of troops. You also had a recon operation reported by the Russians in the direction of Vermivka coming in from Velika Novosilka. They said that this recon operation failed and that they were pushed back. But that's it for Zaporizhia. Let's go to the Bakhmut area where we do have some updates, and I did change the map also. You can see that now I have Jovanka as fully under Russian control. This comes after not only pro-Russia maps, but also some pro-Ukraine maps, indicating that this entire area is really under Russian control, including all of the areas to the right of this highway over here. But Mayorsk is still contested. For how long, we don't know. But for now, Ukraine is holding their positions over here. I want to zoom in on some of the lines over here. You can see that Ukraine actually set up a lot of defensive fortifications around here. This was probably a trench line, although it's hard to see from the aerial view. But I do have this image over here. You can see how intricate the defensive lines were, and this was really built up for years by Ukraine. This is what they were using to hold the line over here. It's part of the reason why Russia was not able to break through, specifically in Jovanka, because of how fortified it was. It is very close to Horlivka, where there was fighting for 8 years, crazy amount of time, crazy amount of defenses. This is just one example that you can see from the aerial view, but there are many more. This was also an area where really the entire perimeter of these bushes was surrounded by different trench lines. And so that's a part of the reason why they were able to hold on so long. But at this point, Russia has captured these fortifications, which means that they have the opportunity now to advance about, a mile before they reach Ozaryanivka, and that will be difficult, of course, because they will be in open fields, and so the Ukrainians could strike them, but it is easier than advancing through trench lines. Also, a bit further to the north, the Russians have actually been able to gain some ground on the outskirts of Kodyumivka and Zemnopilia. They reached this quarry over here, and there's a few more before they actually reach the town itself. You can see over here in the southeast corner of the town, you have some, either it's like water reserves or quarries. I'm not exactly sure. You have a lot of these in this specific area. Like, look at this. This is like some water reserve area in case of an emergency, I'm pretty sure. And so these are pretty commonplace all around Donetsk and in Ukraine in general. You can see there is a line over here of communications and transportation. And so if the Russians are able to actually reach this area, that would disrupt the Ukrainian supply lines, which are going from the wider like command grouping in Donbass towards Mayorsk specifically, but also towards like Toretsk. And so that is part of the strategic importance of holding on to Ozaryanivka for Ukraine, and also Kodyumivka. Kodyumivka is located on like a relative high ground, and so taking it is important in order to not only like dominate Mayorsk, but also to push towards Klishchivka as well. And you can see I changed the map to indicate that the Russians are approaching Klishchivka. There has been some fighting reported in this direction, but the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, every day they release a list of towns where they repelled assaults. And so specifically in this area, they mentioned assaults that were repelled in Zolotarivka, in Liman, Solodar, Ozaryanivka, Odrodivka, and in Pervomaiske. Pervomaiske, if you don't recall, is a bit further to the south over here. And so I adjusted the map as well to just reflect the more accurate situation, because I really overestimated the Russian lines over here. I had them about, what, like 700 meters, or actually a mile and a half away from where they actually are. And so this is like closer to what the pro-Russian maps show, and also some pro-Ukrainian maps, because the Russians, they were able to go on a bit of an offensive in this area and take some of the southern part of the town after a month of heavy artillery duels in this area. But since then, they haven't really made that much progress. Also, around Opitny, I added in a geolocation to show that the DPR are approaching the town. It is reported by some Russian sources that they have really overrun the last defensive line before actually reaching Opitny. But there might be some lines, say, on this road over here, the Ring Road, and also just south of Opitny itself, around this tiny body of water. Again, this is a relatively small town, so the fact that it's taking so long is pretty impressive, because of the fortifications and of the Ukrainian troop accumulations. That's part of the reason why. And the unit in the DPR that is giving them the most success at the moment is the Sparta Battalion. They're really the spearhead of all of these assaults, and they're the unit that took part in this video that you can see over here, where they're overrunning the Ukrainian trench positions. But anyway, let's move on to Bakhmut right now, where there are a bit minor changes, but the grand scheme of things hasn't really changed that much since the last video. Some pro-Ukrainian sources did allege that the asphalt factory was retaken by Ukraine, and I'm not sure which unit would have done it. Perhaps it was the 93rd Brigade, perhaps it was the 54th Mechanized Brigade. They've been very active in the fighting in recent days, but either way, this is unconfirmed, because in all the previous footage I've seen, you've had actually Russian forces in this area, but apparently this capture of the factory occurred on the 19th of October, and so since then there hasn't been any footage released of Ukraine in that area. I'd like to see some if it's true, and then I'll add it to the map, obviously. There's also some clashes reported in the direction of this Bakhmut garbage dump, but it's still under Ukrainian control. The Wagner group has really entrenched themselves around Ivanhrad, but they have not been able to break through into Opitny. I did read a lot of Ukrainian reports saying that they had recaptured Opitny, which sort of surprised me because I had never claimed that Opitny was under Russian control at all. So Ukraine could have never taken it back. It was always under their control. So I'm not sure. Perhaps at some point the Wagner Group actually entered into Opitny, and then I don't know, the 54th Brigade counterattacked. But for now, it seems like the front line is sort of stable around Opitny, but it certainly is a part of Wagner Group's plan to take over this town, and then perhaps they can flank Bakhmut from the south. There is a lot of open fields in this area. There's also some different like sparse like houses like situated in these areas. They look like agricultural enterprises as well. And then you also have the cemetery over here. And there's also this rail line, which could be cut off. But anyway, let's move on to the Crimea/Liman front right now, where we do have news from Bars 13. Remember that unit, they still exist. Apparently, they were fighting in Liman, and now they're situated around Crimea. They're saying that the Ukrainians are actually moving in a lot of forces into the Kupiansk area, and then from there they'll be sent either to Svatove or to, I don't know, Zarichny, that sort of area. And so this would sort of contradict claims that the Ukrainians are preparing for a offensive in the Kherson region, because what the Bars 13 is saying is that a lot of these units and a lot of these people that are coming into Kupiansk are actually people that were trained and like were centered in Kryvyi. So wouldn't it be more logical for them to be sent to the northern Kherson front, not to the Kupiansk area? I don't know. Because this is just like one anecdote from Bars 13, I can't really like give a conclusive statement myself, but it is something to look into. It is pretty interesting. Also, we do have some clashes that were reported in the direction of Terny, Yampolivka, and Torske. Specifically, the 208th Cossack Regiment, they attacked the forested area just to the south of Torske. Basically, this area, there are some different like houses and estates in this area and some resorts. And so you really have that regiment sort of attacking this area, probably to like flank Torske later on, but it is still under Ukrainian control. This is even confirmed by the pro-Russia maps, such as military maps. Meanwhile, the Russians, they also reported attacks. They reported an attack on Novovodiyane, which is, I think it's a bit further north, but they also reported one in the direction of Torske, so both sides are saying there's fighting around Torske. I did change Nevsky to fully under Russian control following a video that was released of Ukraine shelling Nevsky, thus implying that the new front line is probably centered around the Zharabets River in this area. But besides that, no changes in the Crimea front. There were some around Svatove in the recent days, and so I'm going to talk about that now. There were clashes reported in the area around Kislivka, this key town that I've been talking about a lot, between the 14th and the 128th Territorial Defense Brigades against the Russian forces. Still no confirmation that they've taken the town, but again, heavy fighting. The 92nd Brigade, they're reinforcing Sinikivka, which is linked to Kupiansk right now. It is very close to the front lines over here. You can see, and then from there they can sort of push into Vilshana. Also, they are reinforcing Petropavlivka. You have sappers that are mining the town on the front lines. Petropavlivka is a bit further to the south, but still is important for coordination with the groupings that are fighting around Kislivka, and a bit further to the north in Vilshana and in the Dvorichny bridgehead. Supplies can sort of be moved around across the river using the road from Kupiansk to Dvorichny over here, or there can be some sort of communication between the groupings in Petropavlivka through the forest area. But Russia has started to gain some ground in this area. So first they took over Horobivka and reasserted full control of Tavilzhanka. It was reported by the pro-Russian sources that they had fully taken over the train line over here, and that they reached the train station in Dvorichny. I can't confirm this, but a lot of Ukrainian sources specifically are reporting that there are Russian assaults in this direction, although they don't really give specifics about how successful the assault has been. And so it could be true right now this area is under Russian control. If it is, then the new line would like look a bit more like this, where you still have some Ukrainian troops, specifically in Fryanikivka, which is a town just to the south where you have some residential blocks that would still be under their control. Also, some of Dvorichny would still be under Ukrainian control, but they would be dangerously close to the Oskil River, and so it is possible that the Russians will eventually push them out of this area and just force them to either withdraw across the river using this bridge over here, or they'll just like move down here to Liman and Parashi and just consolidate their forces with the wider Ukrainian grouping. Now, let's talk about some of the airstrikes and drone strikes that occurred, starting off with Mykolaiv, where there was a reported Shahed drone strike on a Ukrainian barracks. This was the geolocation provided, so looks like this was a sanatorium or like some sort of hospital that was converted into a Ukrainian military barracks for the war. So yeah, that was struck, but there were many other targets that were hit in Mykolaiv. Of course, there's a level of secrecy because Ukraine does not want to give out confidential information as to what was hit. And so really the only way I can find this information is through like open sources. But I don't have all of the information, obviously. Also, in Kryvyi Rih, there were reports from the governor of Dnipro Oblast, but also from pro-Russian sources that there were Russian strikes, specifically on the industrial sector, and on the energy districts, and so that inflicted some damage and power outages. You're seeing a lot of rolling blackouts in this area. You're seeing a lot of rolling blackouts everywhere at this moment to conserve energy. We also saw a barrage of Shahed 136 drones, aka the Jiran 2 drones, and I think they came in from Belarus because there was a footage of at least one of these flying over Kiev, but they didn't actually hit any targets in Kiev. You could just hear the buzzing sound of the drone flying over, and it happened a few hours ago in the nighttime. And I think the drones actually flew all the way south to Cherkasy and hit a target specifically in this town called Smila. I'm not sure what happened here, but you can see there was video. It was recorded, I'm pretty sure, in Cherkasy, but the perspective is looking through a window at some sort of destruction in Smila. Of course, we have no idea what's been targeted just yet, but there was some interesting news according to government sources, anonymous government sources, that talked to the Israeli news network Khan, and they said that the Ukrainians this past week that actually killed 10 drone instructors from Iran that were centered either in Kherson or in Crimea. And so that is very interesting. I don't know how this happened. Maybe it was some sort of like covert operation by the SBU. Maybe it was some sort of HIMARS strike. Maybe it never happened. I don't know. But interestingly, on the same day as this news was broken, the Iranian government actually advised its citizens to leave Ukraine. And so the coincidence is pretty interesting. But anyway, that's really it for today. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you later.